Good afternoon. Well, it is coming to the end of 2025. Tonight at midnight, we will turn to 2026. And the question that is on many, many, many people's minds is there any hope for 2026? Is it possible at all that we can have hope? So many of us have been living this year in a state of either avoidance, so that we're avoiding any news so that we don't get anxious and depressed, or we're overly involved. And so then we do get anxious and depressed. I can't even say how many clients that I've had this year who have come in specifically to talk about how difficult this year has been for them, as we are all absorbed in the same culture and having a collective experience of helplessness and hopelessness. So, is it possible that in 2026 we can have hope? Well, I believe there is, and here's why. When individuals begin to look at their own shadow material and begin to integrate that shadow material into full awareness, what happens is that they grow, they wake up, they become more whole. The psyche then is invited into the living experience. So let me say a little bit more about that. The shadow of America is now being fully exposed. Whereas we started out this year with many, many people wanting to ban books that had to do with the history of America, homosexuality, transgenderism, those kind of issues. We wanted to just shut that out. We didn't want our children to know about it. We didn't want to talk about it. We don't want to know about it. The problem is that the more they tried to ban books, the more other people began really to be really curious about, well, why were they banning these books? What was going on there? And so they the understanding of what happened in the history of America is becoming more public. In other words, the shadow of America is being exposed. What's happening? The more people try to keep us from understanding transgenderism, the more people are starting to say, wait a minute, that doesn't feel right to just say this person shouldn't exist because they're transgender. That doesn't feel right. Or the more people try to talk about homosexuality, anything on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, the more curious people get about, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right to just shut these people out. Even the Supreme Court agreed that gay marriage should not be stopped, should not be eliminated. And so the more people try to push these things back into the shadow of America, the more exposed they become. Even to the point that the more people rally in groups against such things as the history of America or the transgenderism, LGBTQ plus issues of any kind, the more the news talks about it. And that is exposing those groups and that thinking so that more and more people are having to think about it. Therefore, the shadow of America is being exposed. Our biases, our prejudices, our cruelty, our decision that only white people should be here and have any power, our sort of unconscious collective agreement to let large corporate entities run America. These are parts of the shadow of America we have not wanted to notice. We have touted ourselves to the world as the land of the free and the home of the brave. We have said to the world that we are the most powerful nation in the world. And even that is being questioned now by the world. So the shadow of America is showing. The world is seeing the shadow of America that cannot be hidden anymore. What does that mean? Well, it means that we are now in a hopeful position of being able to integrate. So the more the shadow of an individual is exposed, the more they become aware of their own shadow material, the stuff they've stuffed into the unconscious they didn't want to know about, not just quote unquote bad stuff, talents, um, things that they're attracted to that are beautiful experiences, spirituality, all kinds of things have been stuffed into the unconscious that we just either didn't know about or were told we didn't have. And there's a whole other show on shadow material, which we can go to another time. But the individual shadow material, once it is exposed, begins to be exposed, that is when people begin to wake up. They begin to integrate. They begin to pull together the fragmented parts of themselves and become one whole unit. And so, in that sense, then, that is the same thing that's happening in America. We're moving from awakening to shadow material to a new possibility where we are able to see who we are in both the dark and the light. And that is hope. So I have a definition, an acronym actually, for the word hope. It is hope. Hope is healing through opening to personal evolution. Hope is healing through opening to personal evolution. H for healing, O for opening, P for personal, E for evolution. That is how we develop hope within ourselves. That is also how we will develop hope as a nation. That we will heal the more open we become to our own personal, collective evolution. And that is in exposing shadow material. That is a part of that evolution. We can't say that we're open when we're closed to knowing things about ourselves. That's not opening. We can say that we are open to the degree that we do see all aspects of ourselves. We are open to that degree. So what does that mean in terms of a society? Well, Carl Jung talked about individuals being able to integrate. He called it individuation. He used that word synonymously with the word integration. I like the word integration because I get a visual with it. The visual is I'm putting together all the fragmented parts of myself and becoming a whole person. And so that's the way, and he used the word wholeness a lot too, as also synonymous with that, along with the word self with a capital S. So all of those words were used synonymously. Individuation, integration, self, and wholeness were used synonymously by Carl Jung. So what does that mean in terms of the collective? Well, the fragmented parts of us are definitely obvious right now. People say it all over the news. We see it ourselves. This is a divided nation. What does that mean? There are fragmented parts of us. We're fragmented. We're not whole. And there are people who say that unity means everybody agrees to the same thing. But that's not what the Constitution says. That's not what the Declaration of Independence says. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence talk about open dialogue. They talk about the ability to disagree and yet come to some kind of negotiation that that works. So no, unity is not everything agreeing with each other. In fact, Carl Jung talks about within an individual, there can be contradictory parts, conflicting parts that are contained within the wholeness. So it isn't true that everything has to agree, especially not intellectually, but it is true that the more we contain the fragmented parts, the more possible it is to unite in a common integration. So what does the word integration mean? Well, Carl Jung talked about something he called alchemistry. That's a word that used to be used for pharmacology. So, but what it originally meant was you could put two chemicals together and make a third chemical. Both of the two chemicals dissolved into each other to create a third chemical. And that is definitely one of the ways to look at integration. We can take the divided parts of America and put them together and make a whole new America. That's one way to look at it. I like to also consider the other way of looking at integration, which is the integration that happened during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, which to a large extent is still going on, which is the same as the integration that happens in an individual's life, where the integration continues throughout a person's lifetime. So what did that mean? In the 60s, I was an adolescent, and it's when civil rights was all over the news. There were riots in my high school, around my high school, there were riots. Um, African Americans, Black people wanted to be able to go to the same high schools, drink out of the same water fountains, eat at the same restaurants, um, be able to buy housing that they needed and wanted, or rent housing that they needed and wanted, have voting rights, have, in other words, the same rights as white people. They wanted to have that. And our government had prevented them from having that. In other words, there was a segment of society that was fragmented off of the rest of society. It was a fragmented part. And that fragmented part wanted to join together with the other parts of society. They wanted to integrate. And so it is the same with us as individuals. When we talk about integration, the psyche, which is synonymous with the word soul, which is also synonymous with the word self with a capital S, which is also synonymous with the word wholeness. Those are all synonymous terms. The psyche wants to integrate with the rest of our conscious experience. It wants to eat at the same restaurants. It wants to drink at the same water fountains. It wants to have equal rights to say something, to be heard. It wants to be able to vote on what's going to happen in that individual's life. In other words, it wants to be invited into the person's personal experience. And in that sense, then, we integrate individually, the more we bring the soul or the psyche into our living experience. So many of us live lives that are soulless. We live lives where we just are split off. Everything we don't want to know about ourselves and about the world is split off into the unconscious, and the rest of us lives in this quasi-conscious experience. We call it conscious, but it's really not awake. We're just sort of going through the motions. We're not really having experiences. We are walking through something that looks like an experience, but it's not a genuine experience because we're not all in it. Half of us is gone into the unconscious. So that's the way it's been for America, where we've had all these fragmented parts that are not evolving, have not been evolving. They've been stagnant. We've been stuck. We're stuck for generations and generations with women didn't have rights. I remember in 1974 when my mother got to have, she was a single parent, and she got to have credit in her own name 2 years after I graduated from college. That meant that the most of my childhood and young adulthood was spent without my mother being able to get credit in her own name. 1974. That was 26 years ago. 51 years ago. Sorry about that. My math is not good. So that what I'm saying is that we don't understand rights. We don't understand how to put together those fragmented parts, and that's where we've been stuck. But now, what's happening is there's an explosion of awareness of those fragmented parts. We're now seeing in bold living color ICE agents go into people's homes and churches and offices and on the street and in courtrooms, courthouses, where they're trying to get green cards and or recertify their green cards. And that's because they are not white and they might not speak English as good as other people. That is obvious racism. And we're watching it happen in living color. That is the exposure of shadow material. That shadow material has been there since before the foundation of America. And now It's being exposed. We can't miss it. It is in our faces. That's the exposure of shadow material. That's just one example. There are many, many, many others, which I won't go into now. But again, when shadow material is exposed, that opens the door to the union of fragmented parts. Now, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But the hope that I have now is because of that exposure, we are closer than ever to integration. We are closer than ever to integration. So hope is healing through opening to personal evolution. Hope is healing that is opening to personal evolution. Now, if I am opening to my own personal evolution, that impacts you. And when you do it, it impacts others. And when they do it, it impacts others. And when they do it, it impacts others. And it goes on and on and on and on. That is our hope. Our hope is in our own personal evolution. Yes, we can write letters. Yes, we can make phone calls. Yes, we can march. Yes, we can protest and protest and protest. Yes, we can be vocal. Yes, we can do podcasts. Yes, we can do all of those things. But unless we are in our own place of personal evolution, we're not facilitating hope for the nation. So the big deal is our own personal evolution. And so as we're marching, we are evolving individually and as a nation. As we're writing letters, we're asking for the evolution of other people. As we do the same with podcasts and all the ways that we intervene on our society to say, wake up, wake up. We see the exposure of shadow material. Turn around and look at it yourself. There's hope in that. That is our hope. So I wish for you, for the year 2026, a very hopeful year of personal evolution that you can spread around to everyone in your world. Happy New Year.